The prairie wind cut through Clara Edison's thin wool coat like a blade, carrying with it the scent of sage and distant snow. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, squinting against the late afternoon sun that painted the Wyoming grasslands in shades of gold and amber. Her boots, once fine Philadelphia leather, were now cracked and dusty from weeks of travel. The weight of her empty purse in her pocket reminded her why she stood at the edge of Cedar Ridge, this rough-hewn town that seemed to sprout from the earth itself like stubborn prairie grass. "Last chance, ma'am." The stagecoach driver called down from his perch. "Sure you don't want to continue on to Cheyenne? More opportunities for a lady there." Clara shook her head, her jaw set with the same determination that had carried her across half the continent. "Thank you, Mr. Wallace, but Cedar Ridge will do fine." The driver shrugged. Snapping his rein, the coach lurched forward, leaving Clara standing in a cloud of dust with nothing but her carpetbag and the fading memory of a life that fever had stolen from her. Thomas, her husband, gone in 3 days. Little Margaret, their daughter, following him within the week. The cholera had swept through Philadelphia like wildfire, leaving behind empty houses and broken hearts. Cedar Ridge's main street stretched before her, a collection of weathered buildings that looked as if they'd been assembled by someone with more ambition than skill. The Ace High Saloon dominated one corner, its swinging doors already admitting the evening's first customers. Across from it, Murphy's General Store displayed goods in a window so dusty Clara could barely make out what lay behind the glass. A few women in calico dresses hurried past, their eyes sliding over her city clothes with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. Clara straightened her spine and walked into Murphy's. The proprietor, a round man with mutton chop whiskers that had seen better days, looked up from his ledger. "Help you, Miss..." "Mrs. Edison," Clara corrected gently. "I'm looking for work. I can cook, clean, mend whatever's needed." Murphy's expression turned sympathetic but firm. "Sorry, ma'am. Got all the help I need. You might try the boarding house, but Mrs. Kowalski just hired her niece last week." Clara visited every establishment in town over the next 2 hours. The hotel had a cook, the saloon well. The proprietor's leer told her exactly what kind of work he had in mind, and she'd left before he could voice the suggestion. Even the church had politely turned her away, explaining that the congregation could barely support the minister, let alone hire help. As darkness crept across the prairie, Clara found herself sitting on a bench outside the blacksmith's shop, her carpetbag at her feet. Her stomach gnawed at itself. She'd eaten her last biscuit that morning, saving half for what she'd hoped would be a celebratory dinner after finding employment. "You're the lady looking for work." Clara looked up to find a young woman about her own age, with intelligent eyes and ink-stained fingers. "I'm Emma Hartley. My father runs the school." Clara Edison. And yes, though it seems Cedar Ridge has no need for another pair of willing hands. Emma glanced around, then lowered her voice. "There is one place, though I'd hardly recommend it. The Morrison Ranch, about 3 miles north. Mr. Morrison's been without help since..." She trailed off, biting her lip. Since his wife died last winter. Consumption, they say, though some folks whisper darker things. He's not an easy man. Keeps to himself, rarely comes to town. The last 2 women who went out there to apply came back within the day. Said the place felt cursed. Clara stood, decision crystallizing in her mind like frost on glass. "How do I find it?" Emma's eyes widened. "You can't be serious. It's nearly dark, and the temperature's dropping. Wait until morning, at least." But Clara was already calculating. 3 miles, she could walk that in an hour. The moon was rising full and bright. And what choice did she have? Her funds were exhausted, and she'd seen the look in the hotel proprietor's eyes when she'd inquired about a room. No money meant no shelter, and a night on the streets of Cedar Ridge held its own dangers. "North, you said." Emma sighed. Follow the main road out of town until you see a broken fence post with a horseshoe nailed to it. Turn west there. The ranch house sits in a valley, you can't miss it. But please, Mrs. Edison, reconsider. Theodore Morrison is, well, he's not known for his kindness. Clara hefted her carpet bag. Perhaps he simply hasn't met the right cook. The walk seemed longer than 3 miles. The lantern she'd borrowed from Emma, pressed into her hands despite Clara's protests, cast dancing shadows across the rutted road. Coyotes called in the distance, their cries raising goosebumps along her arms. The broken fence post appeared like a specter in the darkness, the horseshoe glinting dully in the moonlight. The valley opened before her gradually, and there, nestled against a backdrop of cottonwoods, sat the Morrison Ranch. Even in the darkness, Clara could see it had once been grand. The 2-story house boasted a wraparound porch and good bones, though neglect showed in the sagging shutters and the weeds claiming the front garden. Light glowed in only one window, a lonely beacon in the vast darkness of the prairie. Clara's boots crunched on the frozen ground as she approached the front steps. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she forced herself forward. Before she could knock, the door swung open. The man who filled the door frame stood well over 6 feet, his broad shoulders blocking the light from within. Clara's first impression was of dark hair that needed cutting, dark eyes that held no welcome, dark stubble shadowing a jaw that looked carved from granite. He wore a plain white shirt rolled to the elbows despite the cold, revealing forearms corded with muscle and marked by years of hard work. "We're not buying anything," his voice rumbled like distant thunder. "I'm not selling anything. Mr. Morrison, I'm here about the position." "What position?" He started to close the door. Clara wedged her foot against the frame, surprising them both with her boldness. "The one you clearly need filled, unless you enjoy living in dust and dining on whatever you can scrape together yourself." Those dark eyes narrowed, studying her with an intensity that made her want to step back. Instead, she lifted her chin and met his gaze steadily. "You're from back east." It wasn't a question. "Philadelphia, recently widowed and in need of honest work. I can cook, clean, mend, tend gardens, and I'm not afraid of hard work or," she paused meaningfully, "difficult employers." A smile ghosted across his lips, gone so quickly she might have imagined it. The last woman who came here took one look at the kitchen and fled. The one before that lasted half a day before declaring the place haunted. "Do you have ghosts, Mr. Morrison?" "Everyone has ghosts, Mrs. Edison, Clara Edison." He stepped back, opening the door wider. "Come in, then. See what you're so eager to take on." The interior was worse than she'd imagined. Dust coated every surface like snow. Dishes towered in the kitchen sink, and the stove looked as if it hadn't seen a proper cleaning in months. Books lay scattered across tables and chairs, and a distinct smell of neglect permeated the air. "I can pay $20 a month plus room and board," Theodore said, watching her survey the disaster. "You'd have the room at the back of the house. It has its own entrance. Breakfast at dawn, dinner at dusk. I handle my own lunch. Laundry once a week. No gossip. No guests. No interference in my business." Clara set down her carpetbag and rolled up her sleeves. "When do I start?" He blinked, clearly expecting her to negotiate or flee. "You haven't asked about the previous Mrs. Morrison." "I haven't asked because it's not my business. I'm here to cook and clean. Mr. Morrison. Nothing more." Something shifted in his expression, surprise, perhaps, or respect. "Tomorrow, then, I'll show you to your room." The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the moonlit prairie. As Theodore set her lantern on the dresser, Clara noticed how he kept his distance, how his hands clenched and unclenched as if fighting some internal battle. "One more thing, Mrs. Edison." He paused in the doorway, his face half in shadow. This is a working ranch. I need a cook, nothing more. I'm not looking for companionship or anything else. If that's clear, we'll get along fine." Clara met his eyes steadily. "Perfectly clear. Mr. Morrison, I buried my heart with my husband in Philadelphia. I'm here for wages and shelter. Nothing more." He studied her for a long moment, and she had the unsettling feeling he could see through her brave words to the woman beneath, lonely, desperate, clinging to dignity by her fingernails. Then he nodded and disappeared into the darkness of the hallway. Clara sank onto the bed, finally allowing her hands to tremble. She'd done it. She'd found work, shelter, a chance to begin again. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. But tonight she had a roof over her head and the promise of honest wages. Outside her window, a wolf howled, the sound carrying across the endless prairie. Clara unpinned her hair, letting the dark waves fall around her shoulders, and tried not to think about the way Theodore Morrison's eyes had lingered on her face, or the way her pulse had quickened when he'd said her name. She was here to cook, nothing more. That's what she told herself as she lay in the narrow bed, listening to the old house settle around her. But somewhere in the darkness, she heard footsteps pacing and a low voice murmuring words she couldn't catch. When the wind gusted against her window, she could have sworn she heard a name carried on it, Sarah. Clara pulled the covers higher and closed her eyes. Everyone had ghosts, Theodore Morrison had said. The question was whether the living could find a way to exist alongside them, or whether the past would always hold dominion over the present. In the morning, she'd begin the monumental task of bringing order to this chaos. She'd cook meals that might coax a smile from that granite face. She'd scrub and clean until the house remembered what it was to be a home. And she absolutely would not wonder what had driven the shadows so deep into Theodore Morrison's eyes, or why her traitorous heart had skipped when he'd opened that door. She was here to cook, nothing more. But as sleep finally claimed her, Clara's dreams were filled with dark eyes and broad shoulders, with a voice like distant thunder and hands that looked strong enough to break her or gentle enough to put her shattered pieces back together. The prairie wind sang its lonely song outside, and somewhere in the night, a door creaked open and closed, as if someone were checking to make sure she was still there, that she hadn't vanished like morning mist at the first sign of difficulty. Tomorrow would tell if Clara Edison was made of sterner stuff than those who'd come before. Tonight, she slept in a stranger's house, 3 miles from town, with only the moon for witness and her own determination for armor. She'd thought she had nothing left to lose. She was about to discover how wrong she'd been. Clara woke before dawn, her internal clock still set to Philadelphia time. For a moment, she forgot where she was then. The unfamiliar creak of prairie wind against wooden walls reminded her Morrison Ranch, her new life, such as it was. She dressed quickly in her plainest dress, pinned her hair in a severe bun, and made her way to the kitchen by lamplight. The disaster that greeted her was even worse in the pre-dawn gloom. Mice had left calling cards across the counters, and something that might once have been bread sat fossilized on a cutting board. By the time Theodore emerged from his room, Clara had coffee percolating on the now gleaming stove and flapjacks sizzling in a cast-iron skillet she'd scoured within an inch of its life. He stopped in the doorway, blinking as if he'd wandered into the wrong house. "Sit," Clara said without turning around. "Breakfast is nearly ready." He moved to the table like a man in a dream, watching as she slid a stack of golden flapjacks onto a plate, added bacon she'd found buried in the icebox, and set it before him with a jar of molasses she'd discovered hidden behind a bag of weevily flour. The first bite stopped him cold, his eyes closed, and for just a moment, the harsh lines of his face softened. When he opened them again, something flickered in those dark depths, surprise, perhaps, or a pain so old it had worn smooth edges. "These taste like—" He stopped, jaw tightening. Clara poured coffee, pretending not to notice his struggle. "Like flapjacks, I hope," Though I'll need supplies from town if you want better than what I can scrape together from your pantry." He nodded, returning to his meal with single-minded focus. Clara busied herself with cleaning, giving him space to eat without scrutiny. She'd learned in her weeks of traveling that men appreciated privacy with their vulnerabilities. And Theodore Morrison struck her as a man with more vulnerabilities than most. "There's a wagon in the barn," he said finally, pushing back from his empty plate. "Take it to town this afternoon for supplies. Murphy will put it on my account." He reached into his pocket, pulling out a few coins. "For anything else you might need." Their fingers brushed as he handed her the money, and Clara felt a jolt of something electric race up her arm. Theodore pulled back as if burned, his face closing off like a slammed door. "I'll be working the north pasture today," he said brusquely. "Don't expect me back until dark." Then he was gone, leaving Clara alone with the echo of his footsteps and the memory of calloused fingers against her palm. She threw herself into the work with fierce determination. By noon, the kitchen gleamed. The parlor was dust-free, and she'd even managed to restore order to what appeared to be a study. Books on agriculture and poetry. An odd combination lined handmade shelves. A desk stood by the window, its surface buried under correspondence that looked months old. Clara didn't mean to read the letter. It lay open on top of the pile, the feminine handwriting catching her eye. "My dearest Theodore, I cannot bear another winter in this desolate place. The wind drives me mad, and you've become a stranger to me. If you cannot remember how to smile, how to touch me with tenderness instead of duty, then perhaps—" The letter ended there, torn in half. Clara carefully moved it aside, her heart aching for both the woman who'd written those words and the man who'd kept them. The trip to town proved illuminating. As soon as Clara entered Murphy's store, conversation stuttered to a halt. Women who'd barely acknowledged her yesterday now stared openly. "You're out at the Morrison place, Mrs." Murphy stated, her tone making it sound like an accusation. "I am." Clara kept her voice pleasant as she selected flour, sugar, and other necessities. "Brave of you. This from Mrs. Kowalski, the boarding house proprietor. Or foolish. That man's got darkness in him. Poor Sarah knew it too late." "What happened to her?" Clara asked, despite her resolution to avoid gossip. The women exchanged glances. "Finally, Mrs." Murphy leaned closer. "Consumption, he says, but Sarah was healthy as a horse in the fall. Come winter, she was dead. Found her myself when I went to deliver Christmas packages, laid out in her bed like she was sleeping, but cold as stone, and him sitting in a chair beside her, holding her hand like he could will her back to life. Grief makes people act strangely," Clara said carefully. "Maybe so." Mrs. Kowalski's eyes narrowed. "But Sarah had bruises on her throat. Doctor said it was from the coughing. But I've seen consumption take folks. Never saw it leave marks like that." Clara loaded her purchases with steady hands, though her mind raced. Back at the ranch, she'd seen no evidence of violence in Theodore's manner, only a deep, aching loneliness that called to her own. As she guided the wagon out of town, a rider on a bay horse fell in alongside her. The man touched his hat brim, a gesture that might have seemed gentlemanly, if not for the coldness in his pale eyes. "Mrs. Edison, isn't it? I'm Samuel Daniels, Territorial Marshal." His badge caught the afternoon sun, but something about it seemed off too new, perhaps, or pinned at an odd angle. "Mr. Daniels." Clara kept her eyes on the road ahead. Dangerous country for a woman alone, especially working for a man like Morrison. You'd do well to keep your eyes open and your door locked at night. "I appreciate your concern, but I'm quite capable of looking after myself." His laugh held no warmth. "Sarah Morrison probably thought the same thing. Good day, Mrs. Edison. We'll be seeing each other again, I'm sure." He spurred his horse ahead, leaving Clara with a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. She'd met men like Samuel Daniels before, men who wore authority like ill-fitting clothes and used it to mask darker impulses. When she returned to the ranch, Theodore was nowhere to be seen. Clara unloaded the supplies and set about preparing dinner, a proper meal this time. Beef stew with vegetables and fresh bread. As she worked, she kept glancing at the window, watching for his return. He appeared at dusk, moving stiffly as if the day's labor had cost him. His shirt was torn at the shoulder, revealing a glimpse of sun-browned skin and an old scar that looked like a bullet wound. "You're hurt," Clara said, abandoning the stove. "It's nothing. Caught it on wire." But he didn't protest when she gestured for him to sit, fetching her sewing basket and the bottle of whiskey she'd noticed in the parlor. "This will sting," she warned, dabbing the cut with whiskey-soaked cloth. He didn't flinch, though his jaw tightened. This close, Clara could smell leather and sage on him, could see the silver threading through his dark hair. Her fingers trembled slightly as she threaded the needle. "You met Daniels in town." He said it wasn't a question. "How did you—" His horse's tracks were alongside the wagon ruts. "He's not really a marshal." Clara's needle paused. "Then what is he?" "Trouble." Theodore's eyes met hers, dark and serious. "He works for the Cattlemen's Association. They want my land. It has the best water rights in the valley. They tried to buy me out last year, and when I refused—" He shrugged, then winced as the movement pulled at his wound. "They killed your wife." The words escaped before Clara could stop them. His whole body went rigid. "Sarah died of consumption." "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have—" "She was sick." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "But at the end, she was getting better. The fever had broken. She was sitting up, talking about spring planting. I went to check the stock, and when I came back—" His hands clenched in his lap. Clara tied off the last stitch, her heart aching for the pain etched in every line of his body. She was just gone, like she'd decided living was too hard and simply stopped. "Theodore?" His name slipped out, soft and unbidden. His gaze snapped to hers, something raw and hungry flashing in the depths. For a moment, the air between them crackled with possibility. Then he stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "Thank you for tending this. Dinner smells good." He strode from the room, leaving Clara holding a bloody cloth and fighting the urge to follow, to offer comfort he clearly didn't want. They ate in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Theodore seemed lost in thought, occasionally glancing at her as if trying to solve a puzzle. When he finished, he surprised her by carrying his plate to the sink. "I can manage." Clara protested. "I'm sure you can." But he rolled up his sleeves anyway, pumping water while she scraped plates. Their movements fell into an easy rhythm, domestic and strangely intimate. Later, as Clara prepared to retire to her room, she found Theodore standing by the window, staring out at the darkness. "Lock your door tonight," he said without turning. "Daniels wasn't making idle threats." "Are you trying to frighten me away?" He turned then, and the look on his face made her breath catch. "I'm trying to keep you alive. The last woman who stood where you're standing is buried in the churchyard. I won't have your death on my conscience, too." "You didn't kill her." "How can you be so sure?" He moved closer, close enough that Clara had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "You've been here one day. You don't know what I'm capable of." "I know you kept her letter," Clara said quietly. "The torn one. In your study. A man who murders his wife doesn't keep her accusations like treasures." Something shifted in his expression, surprise, perhaps, or a pain too deep for words. He raised his hand as if to touch her face, then let it fall. "Lock your door," he repeated, and disappeared into the shadows of the house. Clara did as instructed, sliding the bolt home with trembling fingers through her window. She could see light spilling from Theodore's room, could imagine him pacing like a caged wolf. In the middle of the night, She woke to the sound of his voice, low and anguished. "Sarah, Sarah, I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry." Clara pressed her hands over her ears, but she couldn't block out the raw grief in those words. Whatever had happened to Sarah Morrison, her husband was paying for it nightly in a currency of guilt and sorrow. The next morning, Theodore was gone before dawn, leaving only a note. "Town council meeting today. Stay inside, trust no one." Clara crumpled the note, irritation flashing through her. She wasn't a child to be ordered about. But as the morning wore on, she found herself glancing nervously at windows, starting at every sound. Just past noon, hoofbeats thundered into the yard. Clara peered out to see Daniels and 3 other men dismounting, her heart hammering. She checked that all the doors were locked, then retrieved the shotgun she'd noticed in the parlor. "Mrs. Edison," Daniels called, his voice mockingly pleasant. "We've come to pay our respects. No need to be unfriendly." Clara stayed silent, watching through the curtained window as they circled the house like wolves. "Morrison's got himself another pretty bird," one of the men said. "Wonder how long this one will last." "Now, boys," Daniels chided. "We're here on official business. Mrs. Edison, we have a warrant to search the premises. Open the door, or we'll be forced to break it down." Clara knew a lie when she heard one. Real lawmen didn't travel in packs or leer at windows. She raised the shotgun, checking that it was loaded. The kitchen door shuddered under a heavy boot. Clara aimed at chest height and waited. Another kick, and the wood began to splinter. "I'd think twice about that if I were you." Theodore's voice cut through the tension like a blade. Clara sagged with relief as she saw him through the window, mounted on his black gelding with a rifle across his saddle. "Morrison." Daniels turned slowly. "Just checking on your new employee, making sure she's comfortable." "Get off my land." "Now, that's not very neighborly. The association just wants to make sure you're treating this lady better than the last." The rifle shot split the air, sending Daniels's hat flying. The man's face went white, then red with fury. "You'll regret that," he snarled. "Add it to the list." Theodore's voice was steady as granite. "You have 30 seconds to mount up and ride out. Next shot won't be aimed at your hat." They left, but Clara could see the promise of retribution in their dust trail. Theodore dismounted and strode to the house, his face tight with controlled fury. "Are you hurt?" He gripped her shoulders, his eyes scanning her for injury. "I'm fine. They didn't get in." "This time." His hands tightened. "Clara, you have to leave. Today, I'll pay you 3 months' wages. Drive you to the station myself." "No." "This isn't a game. These men will kill you to get to me." "Then we'd better make sure they don't get to either of us." Clara lifted her chin. "I told you, Mr. Morrison, I need this job. A few bullies on horseback won't change that." Stubborn woman. But his thumb traced along her collar, and his voice held something that might have been admiration. "You'll be the death of me. Better me than them." He laughed a rusty sound, as if he'd forgotten how. "You might be right about that." That night, Theodore didn't retreat to his room after dinner. Instead, he sat by the fire, cleaning his rifle while Clara mended one of his shirts. The domesticity of it should have felt false, but somehow it seemed right, 2 lonely souls sharing warmth and silence. "Tell me about Philadelphia," he said suddenly. Clara's needle paused. "What would you like to know?" "Everything. Anything. What it's like to live where you can't see the horizon." So she told him about cobblestone streets and gaslight, about the smell of fresh bread from the bakery below their apartment, about teaching Margaret to read using newspaper advertisements. Her voice caught on her daughter's name, but Theodore didn't offer empty platitudes. He simply listened, his dark eyes never leaving her face. "She would have loved it here," Clara said finally. "All this space to run." Sarah hated it. The admission seemed to surprise him. said the emptiness would swallow her whole. Maybe it did, in the end. They lapsed into silence. But it was companionable now. When Clara finally rose to retire, Theodore stood as well. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for staying. For—" he gestured helplessly. "For making flapjacks." That rusty laugh again. Those two. As Clara prepared for bed, she realized the house felt different. Less like a tomb, more like a home waiting to remember what it was. Through her window, she could see Theodore making his rounds, checking locks and latches, protecting what was his. Including her, it seemed. The thought should have frightened her. Instead, it kindled something warm in her chest, a feeling she'd thought buried with Thomas. But this wasn't the safe, comfortable love she'd known in Philadelphia. This was something wilder, dangerous as prairie lightning and just as electric. She was here to cook, she reminded herself firmly, nothing more. But as she drifted off to sleep, Clara dreamed of dark eyes and work-roughened hands, of a voice saying her name like a prayer in the night, and somewhere in those dreams, Sarah Morrison whispered a warning on the wind. "He'll love you until it kills you. The question is whether you're strong enough to survive it." Clara woke with a start, her heart racing. Through the darkness, she heard it again, Theodore's voice, calling out in his sleep. But this time, it wasn't Sarah's name on his lips. It was hers. The storm announced itself with a wall of black clouds that swallowed the horizon like a living thing. Clara had seen winter storms in Philadelphia, but nothing like this. A churning mass of darkness that turned noon into twilight and sent the temperature plummeting. "It's early for a blizzard," Theodore muttered, squinting at the sky from the porch. "But this one means business. We need to bring the stock closer, secure everything that can blow away." They worked side by side through the afternoon, driving cattle into the near pasture, shuttering windows, stacking firewood on the porch. The wind picked up, howling like a wounded animal, driving ice crystals that stung exposed skin. "That's the last of them," Theodore shouted over the gale, herding the final steer through the gate. But as he turned to secure the latch, Clara saw his face change. "What is it?" "Brandy's missing the red heifer. She must have wandered into the North Valley." He was already moving toward his horse. "She's carrying a calf. Can't afford to lose her." "Theodore, no." Clara grabbed his arm. "You can't ride out in this. The storm's almost here." "I'll be quick." He swung into the saddle despite her protests. "Get inside. Keep the fire going. If I'm not back in 2 hours..." "Don't you dare finish that sentence." Her voice cracked. "Just come back." Something shifted in his expression. He leaned down, his gloved hand cupping her face for just a moment. "I'll come back, Clara, I promise." Then he was gone, swallowed by the white wall of snow that had begun to fall in earnest. Clara waited by the window as the storm intensified. 1 hour passed, then 2. The world outside disappeared into a howling whiteness that shook the house to its foundations. Ice formed on the inside of the windows, and despite the roaring fire, cold seeped through every crack and crevice. 2.5 hours. 3? Clara paced, her hands clenched so tight her nails bit into her palms. She'd already lost everything to illness. She couldn't lose Theodore to pride and a wandering heifer. The decision crystallized like ice in her veins. Clara donned every layer of clothing she could find: her coat, Theodore's spare jacket, 2 shawls wrapped around her head and face. She lit a lantern, tied a rope around her waist and the other end to the porch post, and plunged into the storm. The cold hit like a physical blow, stealing her breath. She couldn't see more than 3 feet ahead, but she followed the fence line, calling Theodore's name until her throat was raw. The wind threw her voice back at her, mocking. She nearly tripped over him. Theodore lay crumpled in the snow beside his horse, which stood with its head down, sides heaving. Even through her thick gloves, Clara could feel how cold he was, dangerously cold. "Theodore, Theodore, wake up." His eyes fluttered open, unfocused. "Clara, no. Go back." "Not without you." She managed to get him to his feet, though he leaned heavily against her. "Can you ride?" "Horse. Spooked. Threw me. Think I hit my head." Blood had frozen in his hair. She realized, with a spike of fear, working purely on instinct. Clara somehow got him back on his horse, keeping one hand on the reins and the other on Theodore to keep him from sliding off. Following the rope through the blinding snow felt like an eternity. But finally, blessedly, the house materialized from the white. Getting Theodore inside took every ounce of strength Clara possessed. He was barely conscious, his lips blue, his body shaking uncontrollably. She dragged him to the fireplace, her muscles screaming, and began stripping away his frozen clothes with desperate efficiency. "Sorry," he mumbled through chattering teeth. "Stupid. Shouldn't have. Hush." Clara wrapped him in every blanket she could find, then stoked the fire until it roared. His skin was like ice under her hands. She'd seen men die from cold in Philadelphia's bitter winters, and fear clawed at her throat. Without hesitation, Clara shed her own outer layers and slipped under the blankets with him, pressing her warmth against his frozen body. Theodore made a sound of protest. "Be still," she commanded. "This is medicinal, nothing more." But as her arms wrapped around him, as she felt the solid reality of him against her, Clara knew she was lying. This was everything this man who'd risk his life for a pregnant heifer, who kept his dead wife's letters, who said her name in his sleep. "Clara," Theodore whispered, and she realized he was looking at her with eyes that were suddenly, devastatingly clear. "When I saw you standing in my yard that night, I knew you were dangerous to me." Her heart stuttered. "Dangerous?" "Because I wanted—" His hand came up to cup her face, the touch feather-light. "I wanted much more than just a cook." The wind howled outside, but in their cocoon of warmth, time seemed to stop. Clara could feel his heartbeat against her chest, could see flecks of gold in his dark eyes she'd never noticed before. "Theodore, I told myself I was protecting you by keeping distance between us, but out there, when I thought I might die without—" He drew a shuddering breath. "Without telling you that you've brought light back into this dark house, that when you smile, I remember what it feels like to hope." Tears burned Clara's eyes. "You promised to come back." "I always keep my promises." His thumb traced the line of her jaw. "Even when stubborn women risk their lives to save worthless ranchers." "You're not worthless," Clara said fiercely. "You're the strongest man I know, and the kindest, beneath all that granite. And—" He kissed her. It was nothing like the careful, proper kisses she'd known with Thomas. This was fire and desperation, gratitude and hunger, the kiss of a man who'd walked close to death and chosen life. Clara's hands tangled in his hair, and she kissed him back with all the longing she'd been denying since that first night. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Theodore rested his forehead against hers. "I can't," he said roughly. "Clara, I can't go through it again. Losing Sarah nearly killed me. If something happened to you—" "Something almost did happen to you," Clara pointed out, her voice unsteady. "Life is dangerous. Theodore, love is dangerous. But the alternative existing instead of living, that's the real death." He was quiet for so long she thought he'd fallen asleep. Then, "She begged me to leave this place. Said the isolation was killing her. But this land, it's in my blood. I couldn't go, and she couldn't stay. In the end, I think she just gave up." "I'm not Sarah." Clara pulled back enough to meet his eyes. "I chose this place. I chose this life. And if you'll let me, I choose you. Not because I need to, but because I want to." "You don't know what you're saying. The association won't give up." This land turns brutal in summer, brutal in winter, and He laughed bitterly. I'm a man who talks to ghosts and forgets how to be gentle. Then I'll remind you. Clara traced the scar on his shoulder, the one he'd never explained. And you'll remind me how to be brave. That's what partners do. Partners. He tested the word like wine on his tongue. Is that what we are? If you want to be. The storm raged on, but inside their sanctuary, something new was being born. Theodore pulled Clara closer, burying his face in her hair. I want, he said simply. God help me. Clara, I want everything. Your smiles at breakfast, your humming while you work, the way you stand up to men twice your size without flinching. I want Sunday dinners and arguments about cattle and quiet evenings by the fire. I want to wake up knowing you're safe in this house, that you chose to stay. Then have it, Clara whispered. Have all of it. This time when he kissed her, it was slower, deeper, a promise sealed in the midst of nature's fury. They stayed wrapped together as the storm battered the house, talking in low voices about everything and nothing, his childhood in Ohio before his family moved west, her favorite books, his dreams of breeding better cattle, her secret love of mathematics. I used to keep the books for Thomas's shop, she confided. I was better at figures than he was, though we never told anyone. Another dangerous woman trait. Theodore murmured against her hair. What else are you hiding? I can shoot a rifle, thanks to my father. I once punched a man who insulted my sister, and I make the best apple pie in Pennsylvania, or I did. Anyway, now in Wyoming. His arms tightened around her. My dangerous, mathematical, pie-making Clara. The possessive note in his voice should have alarmed her. Instead, it sent warmth spiraling through her chest. You're Clara, she agreed softly. They must have dozed, because Clara woke to find the storm had blown itself out, leaving behind a world transformed. Weak sunlight filtered through ice-glazed windows, and the fire had died to embers. Theodore still slept, his face younger in repose, the harsh lines smoothed away. Carefully, Clara extracted herself and rebuilt the fire, then started coffee. Her body ached from the rescue, but her heart felt light as air. She was humming under her breath when strong arms wrapped around her from behind. Don't stop, Theodore murmured against her neck. I love that sound. She leaned back into him, marveling at how natural it felt. How's your head? Hard enough to survive worse than a tumble from a horse. He turned her in his arms, studying her face in the morning light. No regrets? None. Clara reached up to trace the cut on his temple, now scabbed over. Though you're not allowed to scare me like that again? I'll do my best. He caught her hand, pressing it flat against his chest where she could feel his heartbeat. Clara, I need to tell you something. About Daniels and the association. Whatever it is, we'll face it together. They won't stop. They've run off or killed half the small ranchers in the valley. They want this land for the water, and they'll do whatever it takes. Then we'll be ready. Clara's jaw set with determination. I didn't survive cholera and cross half a continent to be run off by bullies in expensive hats. Besides, she added with a small smile, you're not the only one who keeps promises. I told Emma Hartley I'd teach her to bake proper biscuits. Can't do that if we're run out of town. Theodore laughed a real laugh this time, rich and warm. God, what did I do to deserve you? Opened your door on a cold night to a desperate woman. Some might call that foolish. Some might call it the smartest thing I ever did. He kissed her again, slow and thorough, until Clara's knees went weak. Marry me. She blinked. What? Marry me, Clara Edison. He gripped her shoulders, his eyes intense. I know it's too soon, too fast. I know I'm asking you to take on my fights, my ghosts, my stubborn ways. But I also know that when I was out in that storm, All I could think was that I'd die without telling you I love you, without asking you to be my wife, my partner, my—" "Yes." He stopped mid-sentence. "Yes. Yes, Theodore Morrison. I'll marry you." Clara's smile trembled at the edges. "Though you should know I'm accepting under protest, since you haven't even courted me properly. Not one picnic or bunch of flowers." He silenced her with another kiss, lifting her clean off her feet. When he set her down, they were both laughing and crying at once. "I'll court you every day for the rest of our lives," he promised, starting with breakfast. "Sit. Let me cook for once." "You can cook." "Badly, but I make decent eggs." He guided her to a chair, then paused. "Clara, thank you for saving my life, for saving all of me." She caught his hand, bringing it to her lips. "Partners, remember that's what we do." As Theodore busied himself at the stove, making a heroic mess in the process, Clara looked around the kitchen that had become hers. Outside, the world lay buried in white, dangerous and beautiful in equal measure. The association was still out there, plotting. Ghosts still lingered in the corners. But here, now, in this moment, there was warmth and laughter, and the promise of a future neither of them had dared imagine. The storm had passed, leaving them stronger for having weathered it together. And if more storms came when more storms came, they'd face those too, together. The night sky glowed orange, and Clara knew even before she heard the shouts that their time of quiet happiness was over. She'd been mending one of Theodore's shirts, humming softly while he read beside the fire a scene of domestic peace that shattered the moment he leapt to his feet. "Fire," he said, already moving for his rifle. "They're burning the barn." Through the window, Clara could see flames licking at the structure where they kept hay, tools, and God help them 3 horses, including Theodore's faithful black gelding. Without thinking, she grabbed the bucket by the stove. "No," Theodore caught her arm. "This is what they want to draw us out." As if to prove his point, a rifle cracked in the darkness. The window beside Clara's head exploded in a shower of glass. Theodore pulled her down, shielding her body with his. "Stay low," he commanded, crawling toward the gun cabinet. "Load everything we have." Clara had never loaded weapons under fire before, but her hands remained steady as she worked. Another window shattered, then another. Smoke began seeping into the house. They'd set fire to the porch, too. "Theodore Morrison," Daniel's voice carried over the crackling flames. "Come out and face justice for your wife's murder, or we'll burn you out like the rat you are." "Justice from hired guns," Theodore shouted back. "At least have the courage to admit what this is about. The association's making a generous offer." Another voice called one of the men from that day at the house. "Your life for the deed to this land. Otherwise, your new woman burns with you." Clara met Theodore's eyes in the flickering light. "We can't stay here." "The root cellar," he said. "There's a tunnel leads to the old well house. Sarah insisted on it after—" He shook his head. "Can you make it?" "With you anywhere." They gathered what they could: ammunition, Clara's medical supplies, the strong box with their papers. The smoke was thickening, making their eyes water. Theodore kicked aside the kitchen rug, revealing a trapdoor. "Morrison, you've got 30 seconds. Go," Theodore urged, practically pushing Clara down the ladder. "I'm right behind you." The cellar was cool and dark, lined with preserves Clara had put up just last week, jars that would likely never be eaten now. Theodore dropped down beside her, pulling the door shut as boots thundered overhead. "This way." He took her hand, leading her to what looked like a solid wall, but when he pressed a certain stone, a section swung inward. Sarah read about priest holes in England, said every house needed secrets. The tunnel was narrow, earthen, shored up with old timbers. They crawled through darkness, the sound of destruction echoing behind them, glass breaking, wood splintering. their home being torn apart by men who called themselves civilized. They emerged in the well house to find the barn fully engulfed, throwing demonic shadows across the yard. Clara bit back a cry as she saw Theodore's horse burst from the flames, coat singed but alive, galloping toward the hills. At least he made it, Theodore murmured. Then his body tensed. Down! Gunfire erupted from multiple positions. They were surrounded. Clara realized with cold dread. Daniels had anticipated an escape attempt. Well. Daniels emerged from behind the chicken coop, revolver trained on them. 4 more men materialized from the shadows. The murderer and his accomplice. Boys, we've got ourselves a hanging. The only murderer here is you, Clara said, standing despite Theodore's attempt to keep her down. How much is the association paying you to terrorize honest folk? Daniels backhanded her casually, sending her sprawling. Theodore roared, launching himself at the man, and chaos erupted. Fists and gunfire, shouts and confusion. Clara scrambled for Theodore's dropped rifle, came up firing. She'd never shot at a man before, but when one of them grabbed Theodore from behind, she didn't hesitate. The rifle bucked, and the man screamed, clutching his shoulder. You witch! Someone grabbed her hair. Yanking her head back, she drove an elbow into his stomach, twisted free. Theodore was fighting 2 men at once, blood streaming from his nose. Daniels raised his pistol, aiming at Theodore's back. No! Clara threw herself forward as the gun fired. Pain bloomed in her side, hot and sharp. She heard Theodore scream her name, saw him break free and reach for her. Then the night exploded with new gunfire. Horses thundered into the yard. Sheriff Bradley from town. She recognized through blurring vision, along with men she didn't know. Federal badges glinted in the firelight. Stand down, a voice of authority commanded. Federal marshals, drop your weapons. Daniels tried to run. A marshal's bullet caught him in the leg, dropping him like a stone. The other association men threw down their guns, suddenly eager to surrender when faced with real law. Clara found herself on the ground, Theodore's hands pressing against her side. Stay with me, he begged. Clara, please, stay with me. Dramatic, she whispered, trying for humor despite the pain. Getting shot, very dramatic. Don't you dare joke. His voice broke. Not about this. Never about this. The federal marshal, McBride. She heard someone say knelt beside them. We've been tracking these men for months. The Cattlemen's Association hired them to drive out homesteaders across 3 territories. Murder, arson, intimidation, we've got enough to hang them all. My wife needs a doctor, Theodore said harshly. Wife, Clara managed. We haven't even had the wedding yet. Details. Theodore's hand cupped her face. You're my wife in every way that matters. The next hours blurred together the agonizing wagon ride to town. Doc Holliday's steady hands extracting the bullet, the blessed relief of laudanum. Clara drifted in and out of consciousness, always finding Theodore beside her when she surfaced. The ranch, she asked during one lucid moment. Gone. His voice was flat. House, barn, everything except what we saved. But you're alive. Nothing else matters. We'll rebuild. Clara, we'll rebuild, she said firmly, then winced at the pull on her stitches. Together, that's what we do. Theodore kissed her forehead, her hands, careful of her injuries. Stubborn woman. You're stubborn woman. Mine. He agreed, and there was something fierce and protective in the word that made her feel safer than any walls ever could. The aftermath played out over several days. Daniels, faced with federal charges and a noose, sang like a canary. He named names, revealed the association's entire scheme. Several prominent cattlemen found themselves under arrest, their empire of intimidation crumbling. Emma Hartley visited, bringing flowers and gossip. The whole town's talking about how you shot that man to save Mr. Morrison, Mrs. Kowalski says she was wrong about him, that any man who inspires such loyalty must be worth something. He's worth everything, Clara said simply. Emma squeezed her hand. When you're healed, I still want those baking lessons, though maybe also shooting lessons. Theodore entered then, carrying a tray with soup. He'd barely left her side. Clara knew, sleeping in a chair beside her bed at the boarding house. The shadows under his eyes told their own story. Eat, he commanded gently. Doc says you need strength. As Clara sipped the broth, surprisingly good for Theodore's cooking, Sheriff Bradley appeared in the doorway. Thought you'd want to know, he said. Judge ruled in your favor. The association's required to pay damages for the destruction of property. Won't replace what you lost, but it's enough to start over. And Daniel's trial's next month. With his confession and the evidence we've gathered, he'll hang for certain. Bradley shifted uncomfortably. There's something else. We found documents in his belongings. About your wife, Morrison. The first one. Theodore went very still. What kind of documents? Letters from a doctor in Cheyenne. Seems Daniels paid him to interfere with her treatment. Poison, most likely. Made to look like consumption getting worse. The association wanted your land even then. Clara reached for Theodore's hand, feeling him tremble. All this time, he'd carried guilt for Sarah's death, and now to learn it was murder. Thank you for telling me, Theodore said roughly. Bradley left them alone. Theodore stared at nothing, his jaw working. Finally, he spoke. I failed her, failed to protect her, failed to see what was happening. You loved her, Clara said softly. That's not failure. But I couldn't save her. No, but you saved me. Clara tugged him closer. And together, we'll save others. The association is finished. No more families torn apart. No more Theodore. Look at me. He met her eyes, and she saw tears there. Sarah's death wasn't your fault, but how we live now, how we go forward, that's our choice. We can let them win by giving up, or we can build something better from the ashes. What do you think she'd want? She'd want me to be happy. He admitted. She'd probably like you. Said I needed someone who'd stand up to me. Smart woman. Clara winced as she shifted. When I can travel, let's go home. Clara, there is no home. It's all burned. The land is still there. The water rights, the mountains and prairie. Home isn't buildings. Theodore, it's wherever we choose to stand together. He studied her for a long moment. How did I get so lucky? Clean living and good looks, Clara said, deadpan, startling a laugh out of him. Marry me, he said suddenly. Now, today, I don't want to wait another minute to call you my wife officially. Theodore Morrison, I am lying here with a gunshot wound, wearing a borrowed nightgown, probably looking like death warmed over. You look beautiful, and brave, and perfect. He dropped to one knee beside the bed. Clara Edison, you saved my life in every possible way. Will you marry me right now, today, so I can start returning the favor? Clara looked at this man stubborn, complicated, wonderful, and felt her heart swell. Yes, but only if Emma can be my witness, and you have to promise to court me properly once I'm healed. Deal. The ceremony was small, held right there in the boarding house parlor. Reverend Franklin performed it, with Emma and Sheriff Bradley as witnesses. Clara wore a clean nightgown with a shawl around her shoulders, flowers from Emma woven in her hair. Theodore had shaved and found a clean shirt, looking handsome despite his exhaustion. Do you, Theodore Morrison, take this woman? Yes, Theodore interrupted. To have and hold, in fire and storm, in plenty and want, in darkness and light, yes to all of it. The Reverend looked mildly affronted at the break in protocol, but continued. When he reached Clara's part, she smiled through her tears. I do, for better or worse, for building and rebuilding, for all the tomorrows we can steal from fate. Then I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss." Theodore was already kissing her, careful of her injury, but thorough enough to make Emma giggle and the Reverend clear his throat. "I love you, Mrs. Morrison," Theodore whispered against her lips. "I love you too, Mr. Morrison. Now, about that courtship you promised." He laughed, the sound rich and full of hope. "Every day, Clara, every single day." Later, as Clara dozed in her husband's arms, she thought about the strange turns life could take. She'd come west running from grief, only to find love in the most unlikely place. Their home was ash, their future uncertain, but she'd never felt more secure. The association had tried to break them with fire and violence. Instead, they'd forged something stronger in those flames, a partnership that could weather any storm. "No regrets," Theodore murmured, feeling her stir. "Only one," Clara said. "I never did find that red heifer of yours." His chest rumbled with quiet laughter. "She showed up at the Hendersons' place yesterday, calf and all. Seems she's smarter than both of us knew to get out before the trouble started. We'll have to learn from her wisdom." "Too late. Trouble already found us." "Then we'll face it like we always do," Clara said, tilting her face up for another kiss. "Together." Outside, snow began to fall again, gentle this time, covering the scars of violence with a clean blanket of white. It was endings and beginnings all at once. Clara thought the end of their old lives, the beginning of something new and precious and worth every battle they'd have to fight. In the morning, they'd start planning their return to the ranch. There would be hard work ahead, clearing ruins, rebuilding, fighting to make something grow from scorched earth. But tonight, they had this love born from fire, promises spoken in defiance of those who'd tried to tear them apart, and the quiet certainty that whatever came next, they'd never face it alone. The midnight rancher had found his match in the woman who'd thought she'd been hired just to cook, and Clara had discovered that sometimes the greatest adventures came disguised as simple want ads, and that love could bloom even in the harshest ground if tended with courage and care. Their story was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. Spring came to Wyoming like a cautious friend, testing the ground with tentative warmth before committing to the season. Clara stood where their house had been, her hand shading her eyes as she surveyed the cleared land. The ashes were gone now, carted away over weeks of back-breaking labor. What remained was possibility, raw and daunting. "It's going to be beautiful," she said, not for the first time. Theodore wrapped his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "You keep saying that." "Because it's true." She leaned into his warmth. "The new house will face east for morning sun. We'll have a bigger kitchen and a proper parlor for guests. Maybe even a library." "Ambitious," but she heard the smile in his voice. "We're still living in a tent." "Not for long." Clara turned in his arms. "The Hendersons are coming today to help raise the walls. Remember, and the Kowalskis promised to bring their boys." It had been 3 months since the fire. 3 months of living in a canvas tent while they cleared debris and planned their resurrection. The insurance money from the association's assets had helped, but it was the community's response that truly amazed Clara. Families who'd once whispered about the Morrison Ranch now showed up with tools and strongbacks, united by shared opposition to the cattlemen's tyranny. "Riders coming," Theodore said, squinting at the horizon. Clara recognized Emma Hartley's neat figure on horseback. Accompanied by her father and surprisingly several other women from town, they carried baskets and bundles, their faces determined. "We've come to help," Emma announced, dismounting with more enthusiasm than grace. "The men can pound nails. We're here to make this place a home." "There's nothing to make a home of yet," Clara protested. "Then we'll prepare for when there is." Mrs. Kowalski hefted a basket. "I've brought curtain material. Mary Henderson has dishes her mother's china, barely used. and Emma has been working on something special. Emma blushed, producing a carefully wrapped bundle. Inside was a hand-stitched sampler reading, "Morrison Ranch rebuilt in hope, strengthened by love. 1881. Clara's eyes misted. It's perfect. The day transformed into something magical, while men worked on the frame of the new house larger than before. With Theodore's library and Clara's expanded kitchen, the women set up an outdoor workspace. They sewed curtains and planned gardens, their chatter mixing with the ring of hammers. "You've changed things, Mrs." Kowalski told Clara as they worked. "Shown us we don't have to just endure what comes. We can fight back." "We all fought back," Clara corrected. "I just happened to get shot doing it." "Which reminds me," Emma lowered her voice, "those shooting lessons you promised." Clara glanced at Theodore, who was helping raise a beam, muscles straining under his shirt. Even at this distance, she saw him checking on her, always aware of where she was. Saturday mornings, Clara decided. Behind the old well house, and Emma bring any other women who want to learn. By sunset, the skeleton of their new home stood proud against the sky. It would take weeks more to finish, but the bones were there, strong and true. The helpers departed with promises to return, leaving Clara and Theodore alone with their new beginning. "Tired?" Theodore asked, finding her sitting on what would be their front steps. "Wonderfully so." She scooted over to make room for him. "Look what we did today." "Look what you did. I just hammered boards, we're told." Clara laughed. Such modesty from the man who engineered trusses to hold against prairie winds. They sat in comfortable silence, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. The tent they'd called home for months sat nearby, humble but sufficient. In the distance, cattle lowed their small herd, slowly rebuilding with the calves born that spring. "I've been thinking," Theodore said, "about what comes after the house. Barns, fences, all the 100 things a ranch needs." "Yes, but also—" He pulled a folded paper from his pocket. "This came yesterday." Clara read by the fading light. It was from a law firm in Cheyenne, informing them that as victims of the association's crimes, they had standing to pursue civil action. More interesting was the postscript several other affected families wanted to meet, to discuss unified legal action. "You want to fight them in court? I want to ensure they never do this again." Theodore's voice hardened. "How many others suffered what we did, but didn't survive to see justice? How many widows and orphans did they create?" Clara thought of Sarah, poisoned for profit, of all the families driven from their lands. "When's the meeting?" "Next month in Cheyenne." "But Clara, this could take years. Legal battles, testimony, reliving everything." "Then we'd better build a strong house to come home to between battles." She took his hand. "Partners, remember in all things." He brought her hand to his lips. "How did I survive before you?" "You didn't. You existed. There's a difference." Over the following weeks, the house grew like something organic, nurtured by community effort and determination. Clara learned to swing a hammer alongside her skillet, her hands growing calloused but capable. She wore Theodore's old shirts and rode astride, scandalizing and inspiring the town women in equal measure. The shooting lessons were a revelation. What started with Emma quickly grew to a dozen women, all eager to learn what Clara could teach. They practiced behind the well house, away from disapproving eyes, and Clara discovered she had a gift for instruction. Power comes from knowledge. She told them as they lined up with rifles. Knowing you can protect yourself changes how you walk in the world. "Is that why you're so fearless?" young Mary Henderson asked. Clara thought of Philadelphia, of burying her family, of standing in Theodore's doorway that first night. "I'm not fearless. I'm just more afraid of not living than I am of dying." The women absorbed this in thoughtful silence, then returned to their practice with renewed determination. One evening, Clara found Theodore in what would be his library. shelving books they'd saved and new ones ordered from Denver. He moved stiffly, the day's labor showing. "You need liniment," she observed. "I need my wife to stop trying to lift beams twice her size." Once, it was once, and Henry Henderson helped. She moved behind him, working thumbs into the knots in his shoulders. "The house is almost ready." He relaxed under her hands. "2 more weeks, maybe 3, then we can sleep under our own roof again." "Our own roof," Clara savored the words. "I like the sound of that." Theodore turned, pulling her into his lap. "Do you ever regret it? We could have taken the money and started fresh somewhere else. California. Maybe Oregon." "And let them win." Clara shook her head. "This is our land. Sarah's buried here. We've bled for this place. I won't be driven off by ghosts or men." "My warrior wife." He nuzzled her neck, making her laugh. "Have I courted you properly today?" "Let's see. You brought me coffee in bed, even if bed was a tent. You picked wildflowers at lunch. You're building me a house with your own hands. I suppose that counts." "Only suppose." His hands found her ribs, tickling until she squealed. "Theodore Morrison, we are too old for such behavior." "Speak for yourself. I'm young as spring since you came along." They tussled playfully until a cough from outside interrupted. Sheriff Bradley stood by the tent, hat in hand. "Sorry to intrude. Thought you should know Daniels was convicted today. He'll hang next week." Clara felt Theodore tense. "Good," he said flatly. "There's more. He wants to see you. Morrison says he has information about Sarah you need to hear." "No." "Theodore," Clara touched his arm. "What if—" "No." He stood abruptly. "He's said enough, done enough. Let him take his secrets to hell." Bradley nodded. "Fair enough. Just thought you should know." He tipped his hat to Clara. "Ma'am, place is looking fine." After he left, Clara found Theodore standing by the creek, throwing stones with a violent precision. "You could hear him out," she said quietly. "Why? So he can twist the knife deeper. Tell me more ways I failed her. So you can have closure." Theodore's laugh was bitter. "Closure? Is that what watching him hang will give me?" "I don't know." Clara stepped closer. "But I know carrying hate is like drinking poison and expecting someone else to die. Sarah wouldn't want—" "Don't—" His voice was sharp. Then, softer. "Please, I know you mean well, but you didn't know her. She was fragile, like a bird. This place, this life, it was killing her even before Daniels finished the job. Yet she stayed, because she loved me, and I let her, knowing it was destroying her." Clara wrapped her arms around him from behind. "She stayed because she chose to, just like I choose to. Women aren't children. Theodore, we make our own decisions, bear our own consequences." He turned in her arms. "You're nothing like her." "No." "No, you're steel where she was silk, prairie fire where she was candle flame." He cupped her face. "And I thank God for it every day, even while it terrifies me." "Why terrifying?" "Because I don't know what I'd do if I lost you too." Clara pulled him down for a kiss, fierce and claiming. "Then it's good you won't have to find out. I'm too stubborn to die. Remember?" "Promise." "I promise. Now come back. Dinner's getting cold, and we have Henderson's coming early tomorrow." The next weeks passed in a blur of construction and planning. The house neared completion, 2 stories of solid craftsmanship, built to withstand prairie storms and human ones alike. Clara's kitchen was everything she'd dreamed, with a new stove from Denver and windows facing her garden plot. Theodore's library already smelled of leather and paper. Sanctuary written in every board. The day they moved in, the entire town seemed to appear. Women brought bread and salt. Men brought whiskey and congratulations. Even Reverend Franklin came to bless the house, carefully avoiding mention of its predecessor's fate. To the Morrisons, someone shouted, raising a glass. May their roots run deep and their aim stay true. The toast was taken up with enthusiasm, and Clara felt tears prick her eyes. Home. They'd built more than walls and roof, they'd built community. Respect, belonging. That night, in their new bedroom, with its store-bought furniture and Emma's curtains at the windows, Clara lay in Theodore's arms, listening to the house settle around them. No tent flapping, she murmured. No coyotes stealing our bacon. No washing in the creek. Thank God for that. Theodore's hand traced lazy patterns on her back. Clara. I've been thinking about the Cheyenne meeting, about fighting the association in court. And I want to do more. There's talk of creating our own association for small ranchers. Protection through unity. Legal funds for those who need them. But it would mean travel, time away from the ranch. Clara propped herself on an elbow. Theodore Morrison, are you asking my permission to fight for justice? I'm asking if you'll fight alongside me. It's dangerous. The association still has powerful friends. Then they'll learn that we have something more powerful. What's that? Each other, and a community that's learned it doesn't have to bow to bullies. She kissed him soundly. Yes, Theodore, let's make them regret the day they burned our first house. His arms tightened around her. Our first house, I like that. Implies there'll be others. Oh, Clara traced the scar on his shoulder. Planning to make a habit of rebuilding. Planning to make a dynasty. Little Morrisons running these hills, learning to shoot from their mother and ranch from their father. Clara's breath caught. They hadn't spoken of children, though she'd wondered. Theodore, unless you don't, after losing Margaret. She silenced him with a kiss. I want that. All of it. Little dark-haired hellions with their father's stubbornness and their mother's aim. God help us all. They laughed, holding each other in their new home while outside the prairie wind sang ancient songs. They'd risen from ashes, stronger for the burning. Whatever came next, legal battles, association retaliation, the everyday struggles of ranch life, they'd meet it together. The midnight rancher had found his light, and the woman who'd thought she'd hired on as cook had discovered her true calling as warrior, wife, and beacon for change. Their love had been forged in fire and tempered in hardship. Now it was time to see what they could build with it. As sleep claimed them, Clara's last thought was of Sarah Morrison, lying in the churchyard. Rest easy, she whispered to the ghost. He's safe now. We both are. And in the settling of the house, the sigh of wind through new boards, she could almost hear an answer. Thank you. Tomorrow would bring its challenges, but tonight, in their bed, in their home, surrounded by the land they'd fought to keep, Clara and Theodore Morrison were exactly where they belonged. Together, unbroken, ready for whatever battles lay ahead. The association had tried to destroy them. Instead, they'd created something infinitely more dangerous, a couple united in purpose, a community awakened to its power, and a love story that would echo through the valleys of Wyoming for generations to come. The midnight rancher and his warrior wife. Let their enemies beware. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a nervous young man who wouldn't stay for coffee despite Clara's insistence. Theodore read it twice before handing it to her, his face carved from stone. Judge William Hurst. Clara read aloud. By special appointment from Cheyenne to oversee land disputes in the valley. She looked up. This is about our case. No. Theodore's jaw tightened. This is the association's countermove. Hurst is as crooked as a dog's hind leg. They're trying to legally steal what they couldn't take by force. Clara studied the summons. They're challenging our deed on what grounds? Invalid documentation. They say the original survey was flawed. Theodore began pacing, a sure sign of his agitation. Every small rancher in the valley got one of these. The hearing's in 2 weeks. Then we have 2 weeks to prepare. Clara set down the letter with a deliberate calm. Emma's father knows law. And there's that new lawyer in town, Franklin Pierce. Young, but I heard he studied at Harvard. We'll need more than one green lawyer against the association's money. Then we'll get more. Clara moved to her writing desk, pulling out paper. Every newspaper from here to Denver will hear about this. Cattlemen's Association attempts legal theft after failed violence. How does that sound for a headline? Despite his worry, Theodore's lips twitched. Inflammatory. Good. I'll make it more so. She began writing with quick, sure strokes. And I'll contact that women's suffrage group in Cheyenne. They're always looking for causes that show why women need the vote. Protecting homes from corrupt judges seems perfect. Clara. Theodore watched her write, something soft in his eyes. When did you become a political revolutionary? The night they burned our barn. She didn't look up from her letter. Now, help me remember all the names from the Cheyenne meeting. We'll need everyone. Over the following days, the Morrison Ranch became a hub of activity. Riders came and went at all hours, carrying messages between the affected ranchers. Clara's dining table disappeared under legal documents, old surveys, and correspondence from supporters as far away as Washington. Emma arrived one evening with her father and Pierce, the young lawyer, despite his youth. Franklin Pierce had sharp eyes and a sharper mind, taking notes as ranchers told their stories. The pattern's clear, he said finally. The association targets properties with water rights, creates pressure through violence or intimidation, then uses legal maneuvering when that fails. Judge Hurst has ruled in their favor in 3 other territories. So we're doomed? Henry Henderson asked. Not necessarily. Pierce adjusted his spectacles. Mrs. Morrison's publicity campaign is already bearing fruit. The Denver Post wants to send a reporter, and I've found discrepancies in Hurst's appointment. It may not be as legitimate as he claims. May not be. Theodore's voice was flat. That won't stop him from ruling. No, but it might stop his ruling from standing on appeal. Pierce gathered his papers. I need to go to Cheyenne, access the territorial records. Can someone ride with me? These roads aren't safe for association enemies traveling alone. I'll go, Clara said. No. Theodore's response was immediate. I'll ride with him. You're needed here to coordinate with the other ranchers. Clara kept her tone reasonable. Besides, I have contacts in Cheyenne now, the suffrage ladies. Remember? Clara, I'll take one of the Henderson boys. She continued as if he hadn't spoken. And we'll stay with Mrs. Stanton. She's expecting me anyway. Theodore's hands clenched. Clara could see the struggle in him, the protective husband warring with a partner who knew she was right. Finally, he nodded tightly. Take the new Henry rifle, and if anything seems off, you come home. The trip to Cheyenne proved enlightening. Elizabeth Stanton, a formidable woman with steel-gray hair and eyes to match, had already mobilized her network. This is exactly what we've been saying, she told Clara over tea. Without the vote, women can't protect their homes from corrupt officials. Your story will help our cause immensely. And your cause helps ours, Clara replied. The more attention on Hurst, the harder for him to rule unfairly. Pierce spent 3 days in the records office, emerging triumphant with a stack of documents. Hurst's appointment was never properly ratified. And look, he showed Clara a paper. The original survey was certified by 3 federal witnesses. The association's claim is baseless. But on their return journey, Clara discovered the association wasn't finished with intimidation. 10 miles from Cedar Ridge, riders emerged from a stand of cottonwoods, blocking the road. Mrs. Morrison. The lead rider tipped his hat mockingly. Clara didn't recognize him, association men from outside the valley. Judge Hurst sends his regards. Wants to make sure you understand the wisdom of accepting his ruling. Clara's hand moved to the rifle across her saddle. Tell Judge Hurst that wisdom and corruption rarely travel together. Big words for a woman alone. She's not alone. Young Tom Henderson moved his horse closer, his own rifle visible. And more riders are coming behind us. It wasn't true, but the bluff worked. The association men exchanged glances, calculating odds. This isn't over, the leader warned. Your husband started something that'll end badly for all of you. My husband didn't start anything, Clara said evenly, but we'll surely finish it. They let them pass. But Clara felt their eyes like cold fingers down her spine all the way home. She found Theodore in the barn, mending tack with violent efficiency. He looked up as she entered, relief flooding his features before anger replaced it. 10 men, he said flatly. Tom told me, 10 armed men, and you faced them down with clever words and a boy barely old enough to shave. And a rifle, Clara added. Don't forget the rifle. Damn it, Clara, he threw down the leather. This isn't Philadelphia. Words don't stop bullets out here. Neither does hiding, she matched his volume. Should I cower at home while you fight our battles? Is that the partnership we agreed to? I'm trying to keep you alive. I'm already alive for the first time since I buried my family. I'm truly alive. Clara's voice cracked. Don't ask me to be less than I am because you're afraid. Theodore crossed to her in 2 strides, pulling her against him. I'm terrified. He admitted into her hair. Every time you leave my sight, I see Sarah's face. I can't, Clara. I can't do that again. You won't have to. She held him just as tightly. I'm not Sarah. Remember, I'm too stubborn to die. Promise me you'll be careful. I promise. Now look what Pierce found. She showed him the documents, watched hope kindle in his eyes. They had ammunition for the legal battle, but would it be enough? The hearing approached like a summer storm, inevitable and ominous. The night before, ranchers gathered at the Morrison house for final strategy. Clara had never seen her home so full. Every chair occupied, men standing along the walls. We present a united front. Theodore addressed the room. Every one of us attends, our wives, our children, if they're old enough. Show Hurst that he's not dealing with scattered individuals, but a community. My Mary wants to come. Henderson said, says if Mrs. Morrison can face down association riders, she can face down a crooked judge. The more the better. Clara added, I've arranged for the Denver Post reporter to have a front row seat, and Mrs. Stanton is bringing a delegation from Cheyenne. You've built us an army, Mrs. Morrison. Someone called out, and murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. We've built it together, Clara corrected. Now let's see if it's enough. The Cedar Ridge courthouse had never seen such a crowd. Every seat was filled, people standing along the walls, spilling out onto the street. Judge Hurst, a thin man with the eyes of a ferret, looked distinctly uncomfortable at the attention. This hearing concerns the validity of certain land claims, he began, then paused as the Denver Post reporter's pencil scratched loudly. The Cattlemen's Association has raised legitimate questions about Your Honor. Pierce stood. I must first question the legitimacy of this hearing itself. Your appointment was never properly ratified by the territorial government. Hurst's face flushed. Young man, my credentials are not at issue here. With respect, sir. They are. Pierce approached the bench with documents. These papers show your appointment was pushed through without proper procedure. Coincidentally, just after the association made significant donations to certain political campaigns. The crowd stirred. Hurst banged his gavel. Order, Mr. Pierce. You're treading on dangerous ground. The ground we're all treading on belongs to the people who've worked it, Clara said, standing. People who've bled for it, built on it, buried loved ones in it, not to men who see it only as numbers in a ledger. Women will remain silent in my court, Hurst snapped. Then perhaps they need their own courts. Elizabeth Stanton rose, her delegation with her, or at least the vote to ensure fair ones. The hearing descended into controlled chaos. Ranchers presented their deeds. Pierce challenged every association claim, and through it all, the reporter's pencil flew. Clara caught Theodore's eye across the room, saw pride mixing with worry in his gaze. Finally, Hearst called a recess. I'll render my decision tomorrow. Outside, the crowd milled nervously. The association's lawyers huddled, shooting dark glances at the Morrison contingent. He'll rule against us, Theodore said quietly. He has to. They own him. Then we appeal. Pierce said, take it to federal court. With the publicity misses Morrison's generated, they'll have to hear us. That could take years, someone protested. And money we don't have. We'll find the money. Clara looked around the group. We've come this far together. We won't stop now. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She found Theodore on the porch, staring into darkness. Regrets? She asked, settling beside him. Never. He pulled her close. Whatever happens tomorrow, we've already won something. Look what you've built, a coalition, a movement. Sarah would be amazed. We built it, Clara corrected. And we're not done building. The next morning dawned clear and cold. The courthouse was even more packed, tension thick as winter wool. Hearst entered looking haggard, papers clutched in his hand. After careful consideration, he began, voice slightly unsteady. I find that the original surveys must be reconsidered. All disputed properties will be resurveyed at the owner's expense, with results to be evaluated. The crowd erupted. Clara saw Henderson's face go red, saw other ranchers surge to their feet. This was worse than outright theft. It was death by 1,000 cuts, forcing them to pay for surveys they couldn't afford, dragging the process out until they were bankrupt. However, Hearst continued loudly, given the unusual attention this case has garnered, I'm ordering a stay of 60 days before resurveying begins to allow for proper procedures. It wasn't victory, but it wasn't complete defeat either. Hearst fled the courthouse as soon as he finished, leaving chaos in his wake. 60 days, Pierce said grimly. He's hoping attention will die down by then. Then we make sure it doesn't. Clara was already composing headlines in her mind. This isn't over. The ride home was subdued, but as they crested the hill overlooking their ranch, Theodore suddenly reined in. Look, he said softly. Below them, the Morrison ranch spread in the afternoon light, the new house, the growing herds, the garden Clara was coaxing from prairie soil. But more than that, riders were arriving from every direction. The other ranchers, their families, all converging on the Morrison home. What's happening? Clara asked. I think, Theodore said with wonder. They're coming to plan the next fight, together. As they rode down, Clara saw Emma teaching a group of young women to load rifles, saw Henderson organizing men into patrol groups, saw Mrs. Kowalski and others setting up outdoor tables, preparing to feed an army. You did this, Theodore said. You showed them we could fight back. We did this, Clara said firmly. All of us. They dismounted to a hero's welcome, people calling questions, sharing ideas, refusing to accept Hearst's delaying tactic as defeat. As Clara moved through the crowd, she felt something shift in the air, fear transforming into determination. Individuals becoming community. In Mrs. Morrison. A young woman she didn't recognize approached. I'm from the Lazy J Ranch, south of here. We got one of those letters too. My husband said to ignore it, but I heard what you did, facing down those men. Would you teach me to shoot? Saturday mornings, Clara said warmly. Behind the well house. Bring any other women who want to learn. As sunset approached and the crowd finally dispersed, Clara and Theodore stood together on their porch, watching riders disappear into the distance. "They'll come at us harder now," Theodore warned. "The association doesn't like being challenged publicly." "Let them come." Clara's hand found his. "We're not alone anymore." "No," he agreed, pulling her close. "We're not." The letter that had arrived that morning intending to destroy them had instead galvanized a movement. What started as one couple's fight for their land had become something larger, a stand against corruption, a demand for justice, a declaration that the powerful couldn't simply take what they wanted. The war was far from over. There would be more hearings, more confrontations, more attempts to break their spirit. But as Clara stood with Theodore, watching stars emerge over their hard-won home, she knew with bone-deep certainty that they would endure. They'd been forged in fire, tempered by loss and strengthened by love. Now they had an army of equally determined souls at their side. The Cattlemen's Association had awakened something that wouldn't easily return to sleep, the power of ordinary people standing together, refusing to bow. "What are you thinking?" Theodore asked. "That Judge Hurst gave us 60 days, Clara said with a smile sharp as winter wind. "I wonder what we can accomplish in 60 days. Theodore's answering smile was equally dangerous. "Why don't we find out?" Inside the house, lamplight glowed warm against gathering darkness. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles to plan and fight. But tonight, they were home, together, unbroken despite every attempt to shatter them. The midnight rancher and his warrior wife, standing guard over their piece of earth and the community that had grown around them. The association had tried to destroy them with fire, then law. They were about to learn that some things couldn't be destroyed, only transformed into something stronger. The thunder of hooves shattered the pre-dawn quiet, jolting Clara from sleep. Theodore was already moving, rifle in hand, peering through the bedroom window. "How many?" Clara asked, reaching for her own weapon. 20, maybe more." His voice was grim. "They're not trying to hide. They want us to know they're coming." Clara dressed quickly, her hands steady despite her racing heart. Through the window, she could see torches, dozens of them, circling their property like hellfire. "The barn," she breathed. "They're going to burn the new barn." "Not this time." Theodore's jaw was granite. "Ring the bell." Clara flew downstairs to the dinner bell they'd installed after the first attack. She rang it frantically, 3 sets of 3, the signal they'd arranged with neighboring ranches. Help would come, but would it be in time? "Morrison!" A voice called from the darkness. Not Daniel's, this time he was awaiting the noose. This was someone new. Someone worse. Robert E. Harriman, representing the Cattlemen's Association's Security Division. Clara and Theodore exchanged glances. They'd heard of Harriman, a professional gun from Kansas, hired when local intimidation failed. "You've got one chance to save your property." Harriman continued. "Sign over your water rights, and we ride away peaceful like. Otherwise, The torches waved meaningfully. "Go to hell," Theodore shouted back. Gunfire erupted immediately. Windows shattered as Clara and Theodore dropped to the floor. They'd prepared for this furniture barricaded. Ammunition strategically placed, but 20 professional guns were more than they'd faced before. "Kitchen window," Theodore directed. "I'll take the front." Clara crawled through glass shards, ignoring the cuts on her palms. The kitchen window gave her a view of the barn. Her heart sank as she saw riders with torches approaching it. She aimed carefully, fired. A torch went flying as its bearer clutched his shoulder. "That's my wife." Theodore's proud shout made her smile grimly. More gunfire, deafening in the enclosed space. Clara loaded and fired, trying to keep them from the barn. But there were too many. Then, beautiful as sunrise, answering gunfire from the hills, the Henderson boys arrived impossibly fast. Then more riders, the Kowalskis, the Pierces, even Reverend Franklin with a rifle that looked older than Wyoming itself. "It's an ambush," someone among the attackers yelled. But Harriman wasn't done. Clara saw him directing men toward the house itself, preparing for a direct assault. She glanced at Theodore, saw the same realization in his eyes. Their reinforcements were keeping the barn safe, but the house was still vulnerable. "The tunnel," Theodore said. "We could—" "No?" Clara's voice was steel. "This is our home. We stand." The front door shuddered under boots. Clara took position at the top of the stairs while Theodore covered the back entrance. When the door burst open, she was ready. The first man through caught her bullet in the thigh, spinning him around. The second dove for cover as Theodore's shot splintered the door frame by his head. "Federal marshals, stand down." The voice of authority cut through the chaos. Clara's knees nearly buckled with relief as she recognized Marshal McBride from the first attack, accompanied by a full squadron of federal lawmen. "Perfect timing," Harriman snarled, emerging with hands raised. "We were just conducting an illegal assault on federal witnesses." McBride finished. "Yeah, we know. See, Mrs. Morrison's letters reached the right people. The Department of Justice is very interested in the association's activities." As the sun rose, the yard looked like a battlefield. Association men sat in shackles while neighbors tended wounds, thankfully none fatal. Clara found herself treating Harriman's shoulder where her bullet had grazed him. "You shoot well for a woman," he said through gritted teeth. "I shoot well for anyone," Clara corrected. "And you're lucky I was aiming to wound." Theodore appeared at her shoulder, blood trickling from a cut on his cheek, but otherwise whole. "Marshall says they've been building a federal case for months. Our situation was the final proof they needed." "So it's over," Clara hardly dared hope. "The violence is," McBride confirmed, "approaching. The legal battles will take longer, but with Harriman's testimony," he looked meaningfully at the wounded gunman, "to avoid a noose, the association's days are numbered." The cleanup took hours. Neighbors worked together, boarding broken windows, collecting spent shells, tending wounds. Emma arrived with medical supplies and news from town. "Judge Hurst disappeared in the night," she reported. "Left a resignation letter. Pierce thinks we can get a fair hearing now." As the federal marshals led their prisoners away, Harriman turned back. "You know they'll never stop coming, maybe not with guns, but men like that always find ways." "Then we'll always find ways to stop them," Clara replied. The yard emptied slowly, neighbors heading home with promises to return if needed. Finally, only Clara and Theodore remained, standing before their bullet-scarred but unburned home. "We did it," Clara said wonderingly. "You did it?" Theodore pulled her close. "Your letters, your connections, your refusal to give up." "Our refusal," she corrected. "Though I admit, I'm tired of being shot at." "Hopefully that's done with." He tilted her face up. "Clara Morrison, you are the bravest, most magnificent woman I've ever known. Flattery will get you everywhere. Mr. Morrison, now come inside. Those cuts need proper tending." As they entered their home, they're defended, saved, fought for home. Clara felt the weight of the night settling on her. They'd won this battle, but Harriman was right. Men like the association leaders didn't give up easily. "Theodore," she paused in the doorway. "What if they come at us through the banks or the railroads? There are other ways to destroy people besides bullets. Then we'll learn those ways too." His hand found hers. "We've built something here, not just a ranch, but a community that stands together. Whatever comes, we'll face it." "Together," Clara agreed. Inside, she tended his wounds while he tended hers, gentle touches speaking louder than words. When they finally sat down to breakfast noon, by then every bite tasted of victory. "The marshals want our testimony," Theodore said, "full account of everything, starting with Sarah." Clara saw the shadow cross his face. "That will be hard." "Yes, but maybe it's time to tell the truth." See justice done, then let her rest. She'd be proud of you, Clara said softly, of what you've built from the ashes of grief. We've built. He caught her hand across the table. Never forget that. Clara, none of this exists without you. A knock interrupted them, Sheriff Bradley with Franklin Pierce. Sorry to intrude, Bradley said. Thought you should know with Hearst gone and the federal investigation. The territorial governor's calling for new elections. Real ones this time. Town council, sheriff, judges. Pierce here's thinking of running for judge. I'll need support, Pierce added. Endorsements from respected community members. You have mine, Theodore said immediately. Both of ours. After they left, Clara stood at the window, watching the sun set over their land. The bullet holes would be patched, the windows replaced. The scars would remain, but scars told stories of survival. What are you thinking? Theodore asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. That, a year ago, I stood at your door with nothing but desperation and a carpet bag. Now look what we have. A shut-up barn, a house full of bullet holes, and the enmity of powerful men. Clara laughed. A home, a community, a future, and each other. The most important part. He pressed a kiss to her hair. Though I wouldn't mind fewer midnight gunfights. Agreed. I prefer my midnights peaceful. She turned in his arms. Speaking of which, we should probably sleep. Something tells me tomorrow will bring new challenges. It always does, but tonight we're safe. We're whole and we're home. They climbed the stairs together, past walls scarred by violence but still standing. In their bedroom, moonlight streamed through boarded windows, creating patterns of light and shadow. Theodore, Clara said as they prepared for bed, I want you to know something. These months with you, building this life, they've been the happiest of my life. Even with the danger, the fear, the uncertainty, I wouldn't trade a moment. He crossed to her, cupping her face with work-roughened hands. Nor would I. You brought me back to life. Clara Morrison showed me how to fight for something beyond mere survival, how to hope again. We saved each other, she corrected, then smiled, though I did make excellent flapjacks that first morning. The way to a man's heart, he agreed solemnly, then kissed her with all the passion and promise of their shared tomorrows. Outside, coyotes called across the prairie, their wild song a reminder of the untamed land they'd chosen. But inside, in their bed, in their home defended by love and lead, Clara and Theodore Morrison held each other close. The midnight rancher and his warrior wife. They'd faced down fire, corruption, and professional killers. They'd built alliances, inspired change, and refused to bow. The war might not be over, might never truly be over as long as powerful men coveted what others had built. But tonight, they'd won. And tomorrow, they'd rise with the sun and continue building their empire of grass and grit, love and defiance. Sleep, my brave one. Theodore murmured against her hair. Dawn comes early on a ranch. Our ranch, Clara corrected drowsily. Our dawn. Yes, he agreed, holding her close as sleep claimed them. Ours, always ours. In the settling house, ghosts of violence mingled with promises of peace, and somewhere in the darkness, Sarah Morrison's spirit could finally rest, knowing the man she'd loved had found his way back to life, and the woman who'd taken her place would guard him with the ferocity of a prairie storm. The Cattlemen's Association had thought they were crushing a single rebellious rancher. Instead, they'd ignited a revolution. And revolutions, as Clara Morrison knew well, were won not in single battles but in the daily choice to stand, to fight, to refuse surrender. Tomorrow would bring that choice again, but tonight, in the sanctuary of their scarred but standing home, they rested. Warriors at peace, for now. 5 years had transformed the valley. Where once isolated ranches struggled against the Cattlemen's Association's tyranny, now a thriving community flourished. The Morrison Ranch stood at its heart not just as a symbol of resistance, but as proof that courage and determination could reshape the world. Clara stood on the porch, watching the sunrise paint the grasslands gold. At 33, she bore the marks of their struggles, a thin scar along her ribs from that night of fire, hands calloused from work and weapons alike. But her eyes held peace now, the deep satisfaction of battles won and home defended. "Mama, look!" A small voice piped up. 4-year-old Samuel Morrison came racing around the corner, his dark hair wild as his father's, clutching a handful of wildflowers. "For you!" Clara knelt to accept the bouquet, her heart swelling. After the violence ended, she'd feared she might never conceive again. Samuel's arrival had felt like a blessing, proof that life could flourish where death had once stalked. "They're beautiful. Sweetheart, shall we put them in water?" "Papa's coming." Samuel pointed to the horizon where a rider approached. Even at this distance, Clara knew Theodore's silhouette the way he sat his horse, moved with the land rather than against it. He'd been in Cheyenne for 3 days, testifying at the final trial of association leaders. With Harriman's evidence and their collective testimony, the organization had crumbled. Its leaders faced prison or worse. Their reign of terror ended. Theodore dismounted with the easy grace of a lifetime horseman, sweeping Samuel up with one arm while pulling Clara close with the other. "It's done," he said simply. "Guilty on all counts. The association is officially dissolved. Its assets distributed to victims." Clara closed her eyes, feeling a weight she'd carried for years finally lift. "So it's truly over." "The legal battles are." Theodore set Samuel down, watching him chase chickens across the yard. "The work of building that's never done." They walked inside together, Theodore admiring the changes Clara had made. The house had grown with their prosperity, a new wing for Samuel, a proper office for their expanding business, but the kitchen remained the heart, where Clara still made the flapjacks that had started everything. "Letter came while you were gone," Clara said, handing him an envelope. "From Washington." Theodore read, his eyebrows rising. "They want me to advise on the Homestead Act reforms. Say our coalition model could help other territories resist land grabs." "Will you go?" "Would you come with me?" He caught her hand. "Partners, remember?" "What about the ranch?" "Henderson's boys can manage for a few months. Tom's practically running the north pasture already." Theodore studied her face. "But if you don't want—" "I think," Clara said slowly, "that Sarah would want us to help others avoid what happened here. And I know I want Samuel to see there's a world beyond Wyoming, that what we fought for matters everywhere." Theodore kissed her, still able to make her heart race after all these years. "Have I mentioned today that you're remarkable?" "Not since breakfast." She smiled against his lips. "You're slipping, Mr. Morrison." A knock interrupted them. Emma Hartley. Now Emma Pierce, with her own 2 children in tow. She'd married the young lawyer who'd become the valley's most respected judge. Their partnership, another story of building from ashes. "Sorry to intrude," Emma said, though her grin suggested otherwise. "But the town council's meeting, and they need you both. It's about the school expansion." Clara and Theodore exchanged glances. The school project was Clara's particular passion, education for all children, regardless of their parents' means. With the compensation from the association and their ranch's success, they'd become its primary sponsors. The ride to town showed how much had changed. New businesses lined the main street. The saloon now competed with a tea room run by Mrs. Kowalski. The church had a proper bell tower, and children played safely in the streets. At the council meeting, Clara took her seat, the first woman elected to Cedar Ridge's governing body. The discussion centered on hiring teachers for the expanded school. "We've had applications from as far as Boston," Judge Pierce reported. "Your advertisements in the Eastern papers worked." Clara. "Of course they did," Theodore murmured, pride evident. My wife's words could convince snow to fall in July. After the meeting, they visited the cemetery. Theodore knelt at Sarah's grave, placing wildflowers Samuel had picked. Clara stood back, giving him space for private goodbye. She'd learned to live with Sarah's ghost, understanding it wasn't competition but continuation, two women who'd loved the same complicated man, each in their time. Thank you, Theodore said quietly to the stone, for sending her to me, for making sure I didn't waste the life you couldn't finish living. That evening, the Morrison Ranch hosted its monthly gathering. What had begun as strategy meetings during the conflict had evolved into community celebration. Families spread blankets on the grass. Children ran wild, and the women Clara had taught to shoot now taught their own daughters. Look at what you built, Clara told Theodore as they watched from the porch. We built, he corrected automatically. Though I mostly just tried to keep up with you. Sheriff Bradley approached, older now but still sharp-eyed. Wanted you to know, got word from the federal marshals. That model you two developed, teaching communities to stand together. They're implementing it in 3 other territories. You've changed more than just this valley. As stars emerged, fiddle music started. Theodore held out his hand to Clara. Dance with me, Mrs. Morrison. Always, Mr. Morrison. They danced on their own land, surrounded by friends who'd become family, under stars that had witnessed their journey from desperation to triumph. Samuel dozed in Emma's arms, worn out from playing. The future stretched before them, the trip to Washington. More battles to fight, more communities to help. But tonight, there was only this, the scratch of fiddle strings, the laughter of neighbors, the solid warmth of Theodore's arms around her. Clara thought of that scared woman who'd knocked on a stranger's door 5 years ago, seeking only survival. What are you thinking? Theodore asked, spinning her gently. That I thought you hired me to cook. Ah, his eyes crinkled with humor and love. But I wanted much, much more. And did you get it? Everything, he said seriously, and more than I deserved. A partner, a warrior, a mother to my son, the other half of my soul. You didn't just save my life. Clara, you gave me reason to live it. Theodore Morrison, are you getting sentimental on me? Must be the moonlight, or the fact that I love you more with each passing day. Clara pulled him down for a kiss, not caring who saw. Let them see. Let the whole valley know that love could bloom in the harshest ground, that 2 broken people could build something whole and beautiful. I love you too, she whispered. My midnight rancher. Your midnight rancher, he agreed. Now and always. As the party continued around them, Clara and Theodore stood together, looking out over the land they'd fought to keep. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, it always did, but they'd face them as they'd faced everything else together, unafraid, building something better from whatever came their way. The woman who'd thought she'd been hired just to cook had become so much more wife, mother, warrior, voice for the voiceless. And the man who'd hired her had found what he hadn't even known he was looking for, not just love, but partnership, not just survival, but purpose. In the distance, a wolf howled, wild and free. Clara smiled, remembering her fear that first night. Now the sound meant home, meant belonging, meant the untamed spirit of the land they'd claimed and that had claimed them in return. Ready to go to Washington? Theodore asked. Show them how it's done. With you, I'm ready for anything. He laughed, the sound rich with promise. That's my Clara. Shall we tell Samuel his world's about to get bigger? In the morning, Clara decided. Tonight, let's just be... So they stood together, the midnight rancher and his remarkable wife, watching their community celebrate under stars that had seen their whole story, from desperate beginning to triumphant present, from ashes to empire, from loneliness to love. It was, Clara thought, one hell of a story. And the best part, it was far from over. Somewhere in the cemetery, Sarah Morrison's spirit rested peaceful at last, her legacy secured in the happiness of those who lived on. The land endured, the community thrived, and love tested by fire, strengthened by trials, stood unshakable as the mountains themselves. Thank you so much for listening to this story of love, courage, and determination in the American West. I hope Clara and Theodore's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine while sharing it with you. I'd love to know where in the world you're listening to this story. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss what this tale meant to you. If you enjoyed this Wild West romance, please subscribe to my channel, Wild West Stories 1850 Inches, and hit that like button. And if you really want to help more people discover stories like this one, please hit the hype button to boost this video. Until we meet again on the frontier of imagination, keep your hearts brave and your aim true.